TipTut.
Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut. Today we are inside of Photoshop taking a look at how to create this cool monster. Now I am using a graphics tablet with a pressure sensitive pen. However, you should be able to replicate this without one. It will just mean that some of the trickier stuff like these hairs and things like that you might need to do with the pen tool, or you might need to create your shapes with the lasso tool and then fill in your shapes with the brush. Basically this is a tutorial for people with graphics tablets, but if you don't have one, you should be able to follow along with just a few extra steps. So we're going to be looking at recreating this style of dude here, apart from I've got a different sketch where he is instead playing his little Game Boy. So without any further ado, we're going to jump right ahead in. I'm just going to create a new layer and I'm going to call this one base. Now I've selected a color palette over here. I'm just going to come along and select my nice green color, and using the brush tool with a smoothness of about 35%, I'm just going to start filling this guy in. Now this is underneath, so I'm going to turn this layer to soft light, and I'm going to hide everything else in my palette. What this means is when I start drawing, I can still see underneath it. You might be able to choose different modes that might work a little bit better. Maybe something like overlay or color burn. Any ways basically that you think is the best way for you to see your colors underneath it. I'm going to stick with what I know works. So then it's just a case of neatening up your initial sketch lines and breaking down your character into base shapes. Now what I've got is this egg kind of shape for his body that I'm pretty happy with. And I'm literally just going to start coloring this guy in. Now you can use the fill tool with the paint bucket here for this, but I find sometimes unless your brush is very, very sharp, it leaves a weird kind of halo around the inside of your shapes, which is potentially something you don't want. And I will say now, it's best to separate out your layers as best you can. So I'm going to pop a new layer in here and come across and do his right arm on its own separate layer. Now, the reason for this is when you come to add your shading and things in later, you might find that useful. Now, I'm just pressing open square bracket and close square bracket to shift or grow my brush here. And for this one, I could probably turn the pressure sensitivity off, and that will help me keep a nice, smooth line for my brush here. So I've turned that pressure sensitivity off, which means that no matter what I do, it's going to press it at the full thickness of that brush size. And I can just swing around for his arm. Something like that. Now, obviously, if we just call this arms rather than right arm, obviously I'm going to need to do some stuff later on to suggest that Game Boy in his hands. So what I could do, in fact, is hide my body layer now. Start to work in these arms properly, and if I zoom in, I can just turn pressure sensitivity back on. I can start to work on this dude's hands. So we can come in like so. Come in with his fingers. And these are just rough shapes. We can always tidy them up later if we want to. But one thing I will need to do, definitely, is erase sections of these for the edge of the Game Boy. So I'm going to come to my lasso tool here, and just where I think I'm going to put the edge of the Game Boy, I'm just going to cut, a straight cut with a nice straight line, chunks of his thumb off, because that's where the Game Boy is going to live. So as you can see at the moment, you can't really see where the definitions of those are, but when you come to do the shading later, you absolutely will be able to see that. Also, turning off the layer above does sometimes help when it comes to filling out shapes, so you can hide a layer and check if there's any holes in your design. And once you're happy, carry on. So I'm just going to pop and finish and do his legs here. So we'll call this legs. And we'll make this guy nice and chunky. He's a thick boy. And what this smoothing does is it allows you to move confidently with your brush strokes, knowing that any slight wobbles are going to be removed and taken out. You can crank this up all the way. But what that does is, as you draw with your tablet, you'll notice the pen starts to track behind if you make really quick motions. So here I'm flicking with the pen and you can see that it doesn't really quite follow. Difficult to see without seeing me flicking it. So what I like to do is just move in slow, confident strokes. So we have our base, our arms and our legs. Time to draw in this guy's shorts, I think. So we'll call this shorts and we'll go over to our nice beige color here. Now I'm going to zoom in for this one and I'm actually going to hide his legs and arms. Maybe I'll leave the legs on because I need to see where they pop out. And I'm going to give myself a bit of a smaller brush. And I need to think about following the curve of his body round. And it's good to draw things even if you're not going to see them because it helps you visualize the correct shapes. So I'm going to bunch them up a bit here. Maybe just one fold like so. And I'm going to come around and I'm going to do all of this section. Just going to paint it in a minute, but it helps me visualize what this guy's going to look like. Boom. So we'll come in and we'll pop all these in and we'll add in the shorts section here. Looking pretty good. So I'll just quickly show you what I mean about that paint bucket tool. I think it is G, the shortcut. If you don't see that, you're probably on the gradient. So you can long press on that and move over to paint bucket. And if I just hide everything else, you can see that when we pop this in, you'll actually get a weird haloing effect. And that's basically the edges of your brush aren't completely hard and there's a bit of subpixeling going on. Now, if your area is huge, it will undeniably be quicker to paint bucket anyway and just come around and touch up these edges. Of course, if you're doing this in Illustrator, which is entirely possible. In fact, I did the last one in Illustrator, but I'm having some trouble with the graphics drivers and for some reason it's not recognizing pressure sensitivity. So I'm doing this one entirely in Photoshop. The only difference in Photoshop is these edges of these brushes like so. Sometimes you will have to fill those in. Okay. So we have the edges of our shorts here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer on top of that. Okay. And I'm going to call this one shorts dark. And I'm going to choose a darker color. So I don't actually have it in my palette. So I'm going to turn this back on and I'm going to eyedropper a darker color from my previous one and then add that to my palette. Excuse me. If I turn this back off again, reshow everything. And on my shorts dark layer, I'm going to hold down Control and click the thumbnail view. It's very important it's a thumbnail, not the gray part, of the shorts layer. And you can see this little floating box. If you click that, it's going to highlight all the edges of your layer beneath, and it's going to stop you from drawing outside the boundaries of them. Okay, so what I can do now is quickly, with just a few solid, strong strokes, start to add in the outlines of my dark shorts. So I'm just going to make sure that these edges match up nicely like that. And don't worry, we'll come back to the legs in a second. Okay, and on this one, we're probably going to come around like so. That's a bit too much. Maybe we'll have it come, there we go, that's better. Come up like this. Yeah, that looks good. Just neaten that up. And if you, again, do too much, you can select your eraser tool with E, making sure it's on a nice hard brush, and you can just come through and undo some of this. Okay. Now, another thing I want to do on this layer is some of his shorts details. So I'm just going to quickly draw in just a quick understanding of things like the shorts bunching up, where there would be creases, the seams of the shorts, some of the belt loops, if you want to add those in, like so. There's going to be some bunching up here as the shorts crease, like that. Probably one over here as well. That might be a bit too much. There we go. That looks pretty good. Let's take a look at that again. Yep, that's looking pretty much there. So now I can hit Control D again, Control and D to deselect that. And I can Control click the legs layer. Okay. Now what I can do is start to come through and deselect some of the layers underneath. So if you click Alt Shift and then the shorts dark layer, Alt Shift Control, sorry, my mistake, and then click the shorts dark layer, it will subtract the layer from the top, but leaving any overlapping segments. So you can see that we have our leg segments here, and we can go on top of these, call this legs upper, go back to our green color, increase the size of our brush, and quickly just brush those two segments in. Okay, now you might get a small line along the edge of your drawing here, but what you can do is just come through with your brush again and touch that up. So no real damage there. So as you can see, our character is starting to form himself a little bit. I have noticed that his arms, however, should be above all of these layers. So you can just click and drag that layer to move it up and down. Okie dokie. Up next then, let's take a look at drawing his facial features. And if we quickly pop all of these into their own folder by shift selecting them and choosing this folder icon, call this new, we can quickly hide that and show our old image to see what colors his eyebrows and lips and things are. So let's turn new back on, and we're going to come up to a layer just above our arms and call this one features. I'm going to go to his lips layer here, and I'm going to draw in the big lips. So increase the brush size just a little bit. A cool new feature in a later version of Photoshop is this rotate canvas tool. Shortcut is R, and what you can do is you can twist and rotate your canvas around like so, which helps when you're drawing lines because it's easier to draw in certain directions than it is others, especially if you're left-handed like me. So that's just allowed me to really quickly and smoothly draw a very precise looking line for the mouth of our character here. I'll also just quickly grab my dark tool, and I'm going to start drawing in his eyebrows, which will make quite angry. And I'm going to grab a white tool here, rotate my guy back around, and I'm going to draw in some nice big eyeballs. There's one. And if you want to make sure that you're being accurate, you can grab your lasso tool with L, loop around one of the eyes and hit Control J. That will duplicate the layer with just that eye selected. And if you go to your rotate tool, and you can just click anywhere, I believe, and hold shift, and it will rotate it back to your increments. So it will rotate you back to straight 0. You can then move your eye with the eye tool, with the move tool here, over to your other eye, and now you know that that's the exact same shape. I might want to squish this one down just a little bit, holding shift to squish it non-proportionally now. That's a new thing. And select it like so. You can then select both those layers with shift and choose merge layers, rename it again to features, and you're back working on a single layer, which is nice and simple. On top of that, I'm just going to grab my dark color again for some pupils. Going to roughly judge where those should be looking. And with my white, I'm just going to add in a few reflections. Okay, that should do it. Okay, got to quickly add in a tongue. So we'll do that again on the pupils layer. We'll call it pupils tongue. Now, I don't have a lighter pink, so what I'm going to do is quickly add one to my palette. Going to select double tap to open up your color picker window, and I'm just going to go up the saturation and lightness a bit and slightly more towards the red to give ourselves a nice pink color for the tongue. I'm then going to add this in here like so. Now if I just quickly hide this so I can see what that looks like. I'm going to come in and add this later anyway, fix it with a mouth line, but we'll just quickly neaten that up. Go back to our pink here, quickly add that to the palette. Go back to our pink here and just come upwards with a quick flick, like that, to add in a shadow of his tongue line. Just round off those bits because I think that looks a bit better. We can then go to our darker color here. I'm just going to help by rotating the palette, and I'm going to start to bring in the line of his mouth. Like so. He's pursing his lips, so we'll put in some concentration lines. Maybe looks like you here. Another one there. Okay, not bad. Maybe we can add in a nice shadow along the bottom. That would look good if I could draw it, so we'll just undo that. For some reason not undoing. I think my Photoshop has crashed, which is lovely. Here we go. Starting to think about it. There we go, undo. We'll just pop that back on. And that reminds me to save. Always save your work, guys. Grab your rotate tool, shift that back to normal. Looking good, okay? So let's take a look at what our other monster had on him. So the thing that really brings us together is the shading. So we'll get to that in a minute. But he had some eyelids, he had some heavy eyelashes, and he had these hairs all over his body. So that's the thing that we're going to do next. Now we're going to come over here to our pupils and tongue, and we're going to add a new layer on top, and we're going to call this details. Okay? Grab your brush tool again. Going to pop it on the dark green layer. And we're going to come over here and we're going to start to look at adding some details to this guy's body. Oops, messed that up. So he had some heavy eyelashes, which we can absolutely fill in. Like that. And he's frowning, so we'll give him some concentration lines there too. We can probably add in a nice set of eyebrow furrows as well. Does that look okay? That looks okay. And that will probably do for that. And what we'll do also on this details layer is we'll just start to flick in every now and then, somewhere around the edges of his body, these little hair lines, okay? So this guy's a hairy boy. Now that one looks a little bit like a nose, so we'll get rid of that one. But he's got these little hairs everywhere. Now this is one bit that I think Illustrator does better than Photoshop, is these quick little dash lines, because it vectorizes and smooths them for you. But either way, they still look quite good and they're fun to do. So why not add them into your designs? Draw some along this guy's arms here. And just make sure that you don't spend too much time thinking about where you're going to put them, because that tends to lead to mistakes. Just try and act naturally. Pop them where you think these things would go. Pop them in the direction you think these things would go. Generally, that's going to be out and away from the body. Don't pop them anywhere too difficult for you to draw them. If you're having trouble drawing them, then they're not going to look natural. They kind of have to be these quick little flicks, just bop, bop, like that. Don't worry too much if some are thick and some are thin and all of this nonsense. Just give it a go. So he's looking all right there. Nice one. Let's compare him to our old picture. Okay, looking good. So he needs some highlights and we can add those next. But he also needs some little details around his fingers just to bring them out. Because remember, we're going to have to add this Game Boy in a minute. So we'll go to our details layer here. And between each finger, if you want to be extra special about it, you can select his arms with control click on the thumbnail. And then you're going to know that none of your details are going to go overlapping here. And you can just add in some finger creases, maybe a wrist crease, like so. And also just a few lines on the outsides of his shoulders to show that they are set back from his body. Okay, this is starting to look pretty good. He's looking pretty angry. One thing I'm not sure about is these lids here. So what I'm going to do is actually add some eyelids. I'm going to add in a new layer. I'm going to call this eyelids. I'm going to select my green. And I'm going to come along and I'm just going to bop like that. See what that looks like. Maybe if one is raised, the other is furrowed. That makes him look a bit more grumpy rather than quizzically angry. Maybe we'll just leave one completely blank. Oh, it's bloody frozen again. Leave one completely blank. and have the other squinting. Maybe the bottom lids. Oh, the bottom lids might look good. Let's have the bottom lid come in. Have him be a twitchy boy. Yeah, the bottom lid there. That one bottom lid going is pretty cool. Let's have that. And then we can add in some detail lines here. For his concentration. Maybe it just needs to be an extension of that line. So I'm just playing around here, which is why it's taking a few seconds. Sorry about that, but I think it's gonna be worth it. Yeah, something like that. So if we come in, add in a little lip. I need to rotate. That's why my lines are bad, because I'm trying to do it at an awkward angle, and I don't need to anymore because Photoshop is finally fixed. There we go. He looks pretty cool, and I'm happy with him. So we need to add in this Game Boy then. Underneath the arm layer, I'm going to create a new layer here, and I'm going to call him Game Boy. Now I'm going to grab his shorts, skin color, shorts color, skin color, shorts color, and I'm just going to go up a bit, and I'm going to add in a little bit more yellow. I'm going to pop that on a swatch, and I'm going to start to draw my Game Boy. So this is going to be just a nice cube. Boop, 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 boop. And you can see that where we've cut out before, we can line ourselves up with that. Like so. And I'm going to bring in a line across here just to sort this out. And then it's going to come in and up like that. And we'll come in and we'll sort all the details out on this in a second. I'm literally just blocking out the vague shapes. It's going to extend from underneath his hands a little bit. Like so. So we can hide some layers now. And we can color in the Game Boy. Like that. Now, with this layer selected, which I'm just going to quickly tidy up the edge there. There we go. So with this layer selected, like so, we can add a layer on top and we can start playing around with this. So really fast and loose. We're just going to drag and change the colors a little bit. Darken, perhaps. Why isn't that letting me darken it? Darken it perhaps this way, where we can just then add in some details. Not quite enough there. Maybe we go back to this full color here, actually. Keep our color palette nice and simple. Add in some details like this, bam, bam. And then what we'll do is we'll come and lighten this up a bit later. In fact, maybe we'll just make it slightly brighter just for now. So we can go to our image and adjustments, hue saturation. It's come up on the other window, so we'll just drag that over and just pop up the lightness just a little bit. There we go. That's the color that I wanted. So with this color selected, I can then go to a nice dark gray and we can draw in our little cartridge, which kind of goes in like this, if I remember correctly. And then there was a lip on the old Game Boys. So we'll do something like that. We can quickly color this guy in. Then I can select with the magic wand tool this one portion, go a bit darker again, and draw a straight line. And that is all it's going to be for our Game Boy. Now, what I might do, if I pop these in their own folder, call it Game Boy. What I might do is add a bit of glow from the screen later on, but we're going to do that in a minute. So here is our character. Here's the flat colors. You can see that on the details layer, there's a bit of fur that overlaps this Game Boy. So I'm just going to rub that out. Those are the flat colors for it. And we're going to have to now start thinking about adding in the shading and things like that to make him actually look good. So whilst we've got all the colors up like this, I'm just going to fix some of these errors that I can see. A little bit of coloring in needed here. Erasing needed from the shorts dark, like so. Cool, looking pretty good. Let's hide him. Take a look at the guy underneath. Not bad, not bad. Cool. So we're happy with that. So now what we're going to do is on top of all these layers, we're going to add a new layer and call this shine. And we're going to get a white brush, pure white. And we're going to pretend that, say, our light source is coming in from this side. And we're just going to draw some shines all over his body. Let's turn the smoothness up for this because he's meant to be a shiny boy. And it's easier to draw nice smooth shines with the smoothness on, believe it or not. So anywhere where you think there should be light hitting this side of the body, like on the top of his nice juicy round lips, like so. In fact, that smoothing's way too much. Let's sort that out there. Maybe on the tops of his round shoulders, along the sides of his shorts. Like so. And down the sides of the Game Boy, maybe. So a nice little shine here and here. And I think he's going to have shiny knees as well. Okay, so you can grab all of those. When you think you're happy, I think I'm going to do a big one down the side of his body like this as well. Like that. That might be a bit too much, actually. Let's just... There we go. Once you're happy with all of those, and they're all on one layer, so it should be pretty quick, you can come over to Soft Light, and then just reduce the opacity of that layer down until you're happy. Maybe about 45%. Okay, now this guy's looking pretty good. So what we're going to do is grab all of our stuff and start grouping it together. So we're going to have our eyelids, pupils, tongue, features, all in one group. Control G will select those, and we'll just call this stuff. We'll pop the details in there as well. Make sure it stays on top. Leave the arms by themselves, I think. We're going to leave the legs, base, shorts, all in one layer, in one group, and call this body. And then we're going to come along and grab the same color as the shorts and a really, really huge brush. And we're going to draw one final layer below our guy here. And we're just going to scribble. Add in some extra bits to even it out a bit. In fact, maybe it needs an even bigger brush. There you go. That looks pretty good. We'll just add in a bit of weighting there. Cool. Now, at the moment, it's the same color as the shorts, but don't worry too much. We can fix that. And we'll just tweak this until we're happy with it. Awesome. Leave that as it is for now and just hide that away. I just realized I forgot the speech bubble. So I'm just going to quickly draw that guy in. We're going to grab our white color from before on a new layer, like so. And we're just going to bring it down. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this on so that I can see the edges of my speech bubble that I'm making. And I'm just going to quickly pop this in here, making sure I don't go too crazy with the edges, like so. Let's add in, just for ramp and reference, let's add in our background layer now. So we can add in a new layer here. We can grab our square tool, drag that out, and I'm literally just going to make this a dark black. Okay, like so. And I can hide this layer. And oh, where did I draw that? Did I delete it accidentally? I think I might have deleted it accidentally. Let's quickly draw our speech bubble, which I always forget. I forgot it the first time I was drawing this guy, and I forgot it this time as well. So I think it's because it's not attached to him. Quickly draw this in. Fill it in like so. And then on the same layer, we're going to go ahead and grab our red, and we're going to draw a nice exclamation mark with a dark shadow. How does that look? Let's do the whole thing in this darker red. Nice big exclamation mark like that. Fill in these missing gaps. Then we can go to Magic Wand tool, select our exclamation mark, go back with our brighter color, and just come in and sort that out, like so. All right, that looks pretty good. Happy. Turn on our background layer again. Now, this is where the fun part starts. I'm going to leave my sketch hidden now. From now on, I don't need it anymore. I'm going to call this layer Bubble, okay? Now, I'm going to come down to my background layer, and I'm going to choose a nice, bright color from the shorts. Something like that. Now, that can be used as our background layer, okay? Just going to quickly, because it will annoy me otherwise, I'm just going to quickly make it the size of the background. Boom. And here is where the fun bit starts. Grab your brush tool and find some nice grungy brushes. Now I've got a thing here called a wet media brush, things like blenders. I've got some dry media brushes. These should all be pretty much included. There's some cool brushes like pastel brushes. Play around with the ones you've got pre-installed, because if I grab a nice bold color so you can see, you might find some nice effects that you're actually a fan of already built in to Photoshop these days. There's loads in there. If you go to general brushes, there tends to be some like softer opacity ones if you're going for a more smoother look. Okay, but what I've also got is a selection of grungy brushes that I've downloaded before, which just give me a bit more variety and shape in terms of my colors. I think on the last one, I may have chose, is it this one here? I don't think it matters really. You can kind of choose the ones you want. Maybe I'm going to go for this brush. This looks pretty good. But here's the point where I put the graphics pen down and I just start working with the mouse only, okay? Because on this one, I don't actually want any pressure sensitivity for this particular part. So I'm going to create a new layer. And I'm going to go down to my background here, which I'm just going to call splodge. I'm going to take the splodge and I'm going to control click it. Then I'm going to take my layer 7 and I'm going to go to this darker color here. Okay, going to select that and I'm just going to start clicking. See what happens. You can see you start to paint in just roughly the background of your section. Now, obviously this depends on the brushes that you use. These ones I find you can reduce the opacity a bit, still looks pretty good with the whole layer. You can obviously rotate your brush as well if you wanted to get softer edges on different sides, like so, okay? And then you just start playing around. So I've added that into the background. I think that looks pretty nice. I'm going to add in a layer above the background rectangle, which I'm going to choose this color for. And I'm just going to start splodging around on here, like so. And I'm going to make this layer just a little bit less opaque, okay? And you can already see, if I hide all of these, you can already see where this one was coming from, okay? Let's add in, let's re-show all of those layers and start working on our character. If you select, control click the arms of your character, then go to the body and alt control shift click, it will select those segments. You can then hit control shift I, on the arms layer here, control shift I, and you'll see that it will select everything apart from those little sections that you've just put in, which I don't actually want. I want this. Sorry, I balls that up. Rather than doing it the clever way, let's do it the easy way, which is to control click your arms layer to select them. Then holding alt with the lasso tool, you can just click and drag in a straight line and remove sections from your lasso here. Then with your brush tool and the dark green selected, come through and start clicking. You might want to reduce the flow of your brush quite a bit, maybe down to 40%. Give that a go. So that just basically means you have to layer your work a bit more, which is nice for when you're trying to build shadows. But this is looking a bit murky to me. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to take my dark color, I'm going to brighten it just a tiny bit, and I'm going to bring it closer to the blue. Not a lot, just a little. And I think that's going to make the shadows look a little bit nicer. There we go. So you can just start clicking these in. Remember, you can rotate your brush around if you want the softer portions to point in different directions, which I do in this case. And you can just start clicking to grow your character. Now that's enough for the arm body. I realize I just did that on the same layer as the arms, which isn't probably great. You probably should have done that on a layer above, which I'll do for the base here. So control click the base layer, and on the layer above it, you can just start working your shadows. Rotate this around a bit more so that that point is facing upwards, and just start to work in some of these shadows like so. So you can see there that that arm layer is kind of messing with it a bit. So you can put a mask on that if you want to. Excuse me, I still had that selection. You can put a mask on this layer if you want to. Go to your lasso tool. Quickly select all of this and hide that portion of the arm. Okay. And let's remember to do the legs as well. Control click your legs layer. Shift your way up. Start to paint this in. So I remembered on this one, I've got to soften it up like so because of the separate legs layer here, which is legs upper. So we're just going to start filling these in with another layer. Like that. Looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. Maybe I can just shrink and soften this section and this section. That looks pretty bad. Let's grab the base layer up here, and I'm going to reduce the flow even more. I'm just going to pop a large one in the center of this guy here. Kind of like the fact that that eyebrow is poking out a bit. The eyelash rather makes it quite bold and cool. And I think that's pretty much getting there. So the last thing I'm going to do is grab a layer at the top, and I'm just going to make my brush nice and big and go to this light gray. I'm just going to click a few times. I'm going to go to a dark gray, and I'm just going to click a few times in the corners just to darken up some of those edges. And that's looking pretty good. The last step that I did for the previous image was to group everything together like so. We'll just pop that in a group and we'll call it new. I then duplicated that group with Control J and merged it together. This gives me one layer for everything. On that layer, I added a filter, noise, add noise, and I made it Gaussian and monochromatic so that it doesn't add any color. And you can play around here, obviously, maybe around 2 or 3%, just to add a little bit of graininess to this particular image. I think that's going to look quite good. You can then, if you're not happy with the colors, add a curves layer, hold Alt, and go between the two layers here and click. That will apply your curves layer to just this one here. And you can start dragging to play around with the light to even darken everything up or lighten everything up. It's up to you. So you might want to bring the darks up just a bit, bring the lights down just a bit, add a bit more color in there like so. Group those just for convenience, and we'll call this flat. Once you're happy with your image, which I think I am, you can just hit export as, and that will open up your export window. Again, that's done it on a different screen just to be difficult. And you can choose your export settings. I'm going to choose PNG, leave it at the same size, and hit export all. Pop that in the same folder, call it Monster 2. And you can take a look at what you've created and compare the two different images you've just made. There's Monster 1 and there's Monster 2. So you can see the second one, I went a bit more grungy. He looks a bit more loose. I think I still prefer this first one, but he's having fun playing his Game Boy. So that's it. That's all for today. Thank you very much for joining me, everybody. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you did, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, that sort of thing. And it really helps. It really helps with notifications and things these days on YouTube to let me know that you guys actually want to watch these videos and what ones I should make. That's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time on TipTut.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.